Good evening to the night owls. Good afternoon to the day walkers. And good morning to the rising dead. Welcome to Classified Culture. If you enjoy science fiction and horror stories, then you've come to the right channel. Our goal is to provide quality and original stories for listeners on a regular basis. Every day there will be at least one or two new stories for your listening pleasure. Help this channel grow as a community. You can help by sharing this video, giving it a like, leaving a message in the comments section, and subscribing to the channel. Your feedback and support is always appreciated. Well, I suppose that's enough said for now. It's time for me to do what you all have been waiting for. It's time to let the words I speak guide your imagination with a dark and twisted tale. Faint light filtering through cobwebbed windows. The air was stale, heavy with the weight of years left untouched. Jonah moved through rooms that were once filled with warmth and noise, now hushed and cold. He felt like an intruder, a ghost haunting his own past. In the study, his father's scent still lingered. Old books, pipe tobacco, and something else, something faintly metallic. Jonah remembered him sitting there hunched over stacks of papers, his glasses perched on his nose, muttering to himself as he worked. Now the desk was bare except for a single book, a collection of short stories by Edgar Allan Poe. Jonah picked it up, leafed through its yellowed pages. One story caught his eye, The System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather. He'd heard that name before, hadn't he? Dr. Vance, the psychiatrist who ran some clinic nearby. No, not a clinic, a hospital wing. Ward 13. He shook off the sudden chill that ran down his spine and placed the book back on the desk. There were other books here too, hidden behind false covers or tucked away in drawers. Journals filled with his father's neat handwriting. He'd never known him to keep a diary. Why start now? But as he read, he realized these weren't just daily musings or personal thoughts. They were records of something else entirely. Strange occurrences at Ward 13. Whispers of experiments conducted there by one Dr. Edgar Vance. His father had been investigating this himself, it seemed. Jonah felt a cold dread settle in his stomach as he read accounts of patients who'd lost their memories, others whose minds were warped into believing they were someone else entirely. And the children. There were entries about children being brought there too, their young minds manipulated like putty. He closed one journal abruptly, suddenly unable to bear reading anymore. But it was too late. Images from those pages refused to leave him alone. Children with vacant stares, nurses whispering behind hands about the signal, whatever that meant, and a fear. So much fear permeating every word written down here. Night fell while Jonah was lost in thought. The journals spread out around him like accused conspirators awaiting judgment. He didn't notice until he looked up and saw his reflection staring back at him from the dark window pane. His eyes were wide, haunted, reflecting the horror stories playing out behind them. He stood up abruptly, knocking over a stack of papers in his haste to leave the room. As he did so, something slipped from between the pages, a photograph. It showed three figures standing outside Ward 13, two men and a woman, their faces blurred as if deliberately smudged out with charcoal. Jonah turned on the light, leaning closer to examine it. He recognized one of the men instantly. It was him, or at least someone who looked just like him. The other man he didn't know, but there was something familiar about him nonetheless. That leaf was the same shade as his own hair, the jawline similar enough to be almost familial. But it was the woman who caught his attention. She had long dark hair, pale skin, eyes that seemed to stare right through him even though her features were obscured. There was a familiarity there too, though he couldn't quite place where he knew her from. A soft thump echoed through the house, startling Jonah out of his reverie. He looked up from the photograph, listening intently for any further noise. Silence greeted him, heavy and oppressive. But now that he'd heard it once, he realized he wasn't alone in this old house after all. Something was moving within its walls, something that didn't belong there. And somehow, Jonah knew, with a cold certainty, it had everything to do with Ward 13 and the journals hidden away by his father. He felt an inexplicable pull towards the abandoned hospital wing, like a moth drawn to flame. And he knew without doubt that once he started down this path, there would be no turning back. As Jonah left the study, tucking the photograph into his pocket along with the journals, he couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The house seemed alive around him, breathing in anticipation as it awaited his return to Ward 13. And though fear coiled tightly within his chest, like a snake ready to strike, curiosity burned brighter still. He would find out what had happened here, no matter how dark the truth might be, no matter how deep he had to delve into madness itself. For Jonah Mercer was home now, and this was his reckoning with the past. In the chill of early autumn, Jonah Mercer stepped out onto the porch of his childhood home, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him with a finality that echoed through the empty house like a distant gunshot. He stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath of cool air laced with the scent of decaying leaves and damp earth. The sun hung low in the sky, casting elongated shadows that seemed to reach out towards him, beckoning him away from the sterile emptiness of his father's house. His car still sat in the driveway where he parked it hours earlier, its once glossy black paint now dulled by years of neglect and exposure to the elements. It was an unremarkable vehicle, much like Jonah himself. Ordinary, nondescript, easily overlooked. But today, it served as a lifeline back to reality, anchoring him amidst the swirling memories that threatened to consume him. As he approached the car, he noticed something unusual about one of its windows. It was cracked, a fine web of splintered glass radiating out from a single point of impact. He leaned closer, squinting against the glare of the setting sun, trying to make out any signs of forced entry or tampering. There were none. No scratches on the surrounding metal, no remnants of any tool that might have been used to break it. Strange, he thought. The last time he'd seen this car was when he left for basic training over a decade ago. His father had always kept it in pristine condition, not out of any particular affection for the vehicle itself, but because maintaining such standards was simply what men like him did. So how could this have happened without his knowledge? Shaking off the unease that threatened to take root, Jonah opened the driver's side door and slid behind the wheel. The interior smelled faintly of dust and old upholstery, but beneath those familiar odors lingered something else. A faint metallic tang that made the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. It was then he remembered the journals tucked into his pocket, remnants of his father's past, hidden away amidst the pages of long-forgotten stories. And with memory came another. The mention of Ward 13 within one of those worn volumes. A name whispered like an obscenity through its yellowed pages. Jonah reached for the ignition, his fingers brushing against something cold and smooth resting atop it. He lifted it up to reveal an old-fashioned keychain bearing the insignia of St. Mercy Hospital, an intricate stylized cross intertwined with a serpent swallowing its own tail. Hanging from one end was a single key, tarnished but unmistakably identical to those he'd found amongst his father's belongings earlier that day. A chill ran down Jonah's spine as he stared at the key resting in his palm. There could be no doubting now. Whatever had happened within Ward 13 was intimately connected to his own family, to this very house. And with each passing moment, the inexplicable pull towards that abandoned hospital wing grew stronger, more insistent. He started the engine, its throaty rumble filling the silence of the old neighborhood like thunder warning of an approaching storm. As he pulled away from the curb and turned onto the street leading toward St. Mercy Hospital, Jonah couldn't shake off the feeling that eyes watched him go, unseen but unmistakably present. The journey took little more than 10 minutes along familiar roads, now softened by time's gentle erosion. Yet every mile seemed to stretch out before him like an eternity, each turn of the wheel dragging him deeper into uncertainty and dread. By the time he reached his destination, Jonah felt as though he were crossing some invisible threshold into another world entirely. St. Mercy Hospital loomed before him, its once majestic facade now marred by age and disrepair. The grandeur that had once been its hallmark was reduced to a patina of decay, the grand entrance flanked not by attendants but by weeds choked with neglect. And yet, despite its dilapidated state, there remained something almost defiant about it still, as if the building itself refused to yield entirely to time's relentless march. Jonah parked his car alongside the curb opposite the hospital entrance, noting the absence of any other vehicle save for a solitary figure hunched over a motorcycle some distance away. As he stepped out onto the pavement, he felt an unexpected stab of pain in his side, a dull throb where earlier that day he'd taken a blow from a falling beam during his search through his father's study. He reached into his pocket, fingers closing around one of the painkillers left over from his tour overseas. Popping it onto his tongue without thought for its age or efficacy, Jonah swallowed hard before turning towards the hospital entrance. With each step he took, however, he couldn't help but feel as though he were being watched once more. This time, not just by unseen eyes, but by the very building itself. As he approached the entrance, Jonah noted how the heavy oak doors hung slightly ajar, allowing just enough space for him to slip through without causing any undue noise. It was almost as if they'd been left open specifically in anticipation of his arrival, an eerie welcome awaiting him within those darkened halls beyond. The interior of St. Mercy Hospital seemed barely changed since Jonah's last visit there as a child, accompanying his mother for some long-forgotten appointment or another. The air hung heavy with the scent of antiseptic and age-old dust, while shadows danced in the corners of his vision like phantoms born of flickering fluorescent lights. As he ventured deeper into the labyrinthine corridors, Jonah couldn't shake off the sensation that something wasn't quite right here. There was no sense of order to this place, no signs directing visitors towards reception or waiting areas. Instead, every turn led him further down, seemingly endless paths lined with doors, behind which lay nothing but empty rooms devoid of any trace of their former occupants. It wasn't until he turned yet another corner that Jonah finally stumbled upon something resembling a clue. A nameplate screwed onto the wall beside one particular door, Dr. Edgar Vance, psychiatrist. Below it hung an old-fashioned buzzer, its button worn smooth by years of constant use. Without hesitation, Jonah reached out and pressed down hard upon it. For several heartbeats, there was silence save for the low hum of electricity coursing through unseen wires behind those closed doors. Then suddenly, a voice burst forth from the other side, crackling with static but unmistakably human nonetheless. "Enter." Jonah hesitated, hand hovering near the doorknob, as if waiting for some silent command before pushing it open at last. The room beyond was dimly lit, filled with bookcases groaning under the weight of countless tomes bearing titles both familiar and obscure. Behind a desk shoved haphazardly against one wall, sat an elderly man hunched over yet more books, his frail form barely visible amid stacks of yellowed papers, their contents illegible from Jonah's vantage point. As he stepped further into the room, however, it became clear that this could be none other than Dr. Edgar Vance himself. Here at last was evidence of the psychiatrist's existence beyond mere hearsay or faded nameplates. The doctor looked up as Jonah approached, his eyes glinting beneath bushy eyebrows like those of some wild creature caught unawares in torchlight. Those piercing orbs seemed to bore right through him, piercing deep into places best left unexplored, if given half a chance. "Ah," the old man rasped at last, breaking an awkward silence stretching out between them like elastic pulled taut. "You're here about Ward 13 then?" Jonah started slightly, caught off guard by how readily Vance seemed to know why he'd come knocking at his door after all these years of silence. Yet even as surprise gave way once more to unease, Jonah found himself nodding nonetheless, a silent admission that yes indeed, he had questions concerning whatever dark secrets lay hidden behind those infamous walls. Vance smiled then, displaying teeth yellowed with age, but still sharp enough to seem almost wolfish in their eagerness. "Good," he said simply before gesturing towards the chair opposite his own, inviting Jonah to take a seat. "Then let us begin." As Jonah lowered himself gingerly onto its worn cushion, he couldn't help but notice how the pain in his side seemed suddenly amplified tenfold, each throb now echoing through him like some grim reminder of what awaited him beyond this particular conversation's end. But there was no turning back now, not with Ward 13 looming ever larger on the horizon and shadows creeping steadily closer around them both. So instead, Jonah steeled himself against whatever horrors might lie ahead, physical or otherwise, and settled in to hear what Dr. Edgar Vance had to say regarding his long-lost brother, and the truth behind those infamous rumors surrounding Ward 13. Thus began their descent into madness together. One man seeking answers, another seemingly eager to provide them at last after so many years spent locked away amidst dusty tomes and half-forgotten memories. Little did they know then how far down this particular rabbit hole stretched, or what manner of monstrous creature might yet be waiting for them at its very bottom. In the hushed silence of Ward 13, the air hung heavy with decay and the weight of untold histories. Jonah, Thomas, and Alina moved cautiously through the cavernous hallways, their footsteps echoing ominously off the faded tiles like whispered secrets from another time. The dim light cast by their flashlights played over peeling walls, adorned with ghosts of long-erased names, each one a haunting reminder of those who had passed through these doors and never emerged. The hospital wing seemed to breathe around them, its old bones creaking with disuse and neglect, cobwebs draped like shrouds from the ceiling, swaying gently as if disturbed by spectral breath. Dust motes danced in their beams of light, catching the illumination briefly before falling back into obscurity. It was as though they were intruders disturbing a long-forgotten slumber, awakening something better left undisturbed. Jonah led the way, his injured side throbbing like a second heartbeat against the chill air. He clutched the bundle of journals found in his father's study to his chest, their pages rustling softly as if whispering warnings only he could hear. Behind him, Thomas and Alina walked closely together, their shadows merging into one under the harsh glare of their flashlights. They held themselves rigidly apart from each other, their hands brushing occasionally but never quite touching, a delicate balance of fear and companionship that seemed precarious at best. As they ventured deeper into Ward 13, the atmosphere grew heavier still. The once white walls now bore stains of an indeterminate nature, like fingerprints pressed there by unseen hands reaching out from another realm. The stench of damp decay mingled with something else, a faint metallic tang that made Alina's stomach churn even as it triggered a distant memory she couldn't quite grasp. They passed rooms filled with rusted medical equipment and mold-ridden beds, their mattresses still stained darkly where patients had once lain. Each doorway they crossed seemed to swallow some of the light, leaving them feeling increasingly claustrophobic despite the vast openness around them. The silence pressed down upon them like a physical weight, broken only by the distant drip, drip, drip of water somewhere unseen. Suddenly, Thomas froze mid-step, his breath catching audibly in his throat. He pointed towards a nearby door, its windows shattered and draped with ragged cobwebs. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Jonah and Alina fell silent, straining their ears. For a moment, there was nothing but the thrumming of blood in their veins. Then it came again, a soft scrape, like something being dragged across linoleum, far too slowly to be human. It echoed through the hallway, raising gooseflesh on their arms despite the oppressive heat. They approached the door cautiously, their hearts pounding in syncopated rhythm. As they drew nearer, Jonah noticed that the scrape seemed to come from inside the room, not out in the corridor where they stood. He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing against cold metal as he pushed the door open just wide enough for them to slip through. The sight that greeted them defied explanation. A stretcher lay overturned on the floor, its legs splayed at odd angles like a helpless insect trapped on its back. Dragging across the floor beside it was an unseen force, leaving behind it a trail of disturbed dust and debris. As they watched in horrified fascination, the scrape echoed again, growing louder now as if beckoning them closer. Alina stepped forward without hesitation, her curiosity overcoming her fear. She reached down towards the source of the sound, her fingers brushing against something smooth and cold. As she lifted it up into the light, they saw that it was a wheelchair, its tires spinning uselessly where they had come to rest against the leg of the fallen stretcher. "But how?" Thomas began, his brow furrowed in confusion. Then he caught sight of something else moving within the room. A shadow cast by their flashlights, dancing eerily along the far wall despite there being no source of light within that corner. Jonah followed its path with his eyes, tracking it back towards its origin point. There, huddled against the wall, was another wheelchair, this one still occupied. In its seat sat an old woman, her hair a wild tangle about her shoulders, her mouth open wide in what might have been either a scream or a silent plea for help. Her eyes were milky with cataracts, but they seemed to fix upon Jonah nonetheless as he approached her cautiously. He reached out towards her, his hand hovering inches from hers before she suddenly lashed out, grabbing him by the wrist with surprising strength. Her grip was like ice, cold and unyielding despite the sweltering heat of Ward 13. "Get away," she rasped, her voice hoarse as if long unused. "You shouldn't be here. None of you should." Jonah tried gently but firmly to prise her fingers from his arm, while Thomas and Alina watched anxiously from behind him. The woman's gaze flicked briefly towards them before settling once more on Jonah. "You can't stop it," she whispered, releasing him abruptly. "It's already too late." As if in response to her words, the light flickering from their flashlights seemed to dim further still, plunging Ward 13 into an oppressive gloom that clung to them like shrouds of despair. From somewhere deeper within the hospital wing came a sound they had not heard before, a low moaning unlike any wind or settling building could produce. It grew louder with each passing second, resonating through every corridor and chamber until it seemed as though all of Ward 13 was filled with an eerie chorus of suffering. Then, without warning, it ceased entirely, leaving them alone once more in the crushing silence. But they knew now that something had awakened within these walls, something dark and ancient and malevolent, something that would not let them leave so easily. And as one they turned, fleeing back down those long abandoned hallways pursued by shadows too swift to be merely their own. In the gloom of Ward 13, the air seemed to thicken around them, viscous as oil, heavy with anticipation. Jonah's ears popped, as if they descended into deep water, and he felt an unmistakable pressure against his mind, like fingers pushing at the edges of his thoughts. "Can you hear it?" Alina whispered, her voice barely audible over the static hum that now filled their ears. Thomas looked at her, then at Jonah, before nodding grimly. They stood huddled together in a tight knot, flashlights sweeping nervously through the shadows cast by peeling paint and crumbling plaster. At first, it was little more than a distant echo, a faint reverberation beneath the ceaseless whisper of their own breathing. But with each step deeper into Ward 13's labyrinthine corridors, that eerie resonance grew louder, insidious tendrils reaching out to ensnare them. It sounded like voices, countless murmurs blending together in an incomprehensible chorus, rising and falling like waves crashing against a distant shore. "Echoes," Jonah muttered, recalling the woman they'd encountered earlier, her milky eyes haunting him even now. "She said we shouldn't be here, that it was too late." Thomas swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. Too late for what? Before anyone could answer, Alina cried out suddenly, clutching at her temple. Her flashlight tumbled from her hand, spinning wildly across the filthy floor before coming to rest against a rusted IV stand. The beam cast grotesque shadows dancing on the wall behind it, contorting into twisted faces that seemed almost alive. Alina. Jonah reached for her, but she recoiled, pressing herself back against Thomas instead. Her eyes were wide with terror as she looked up at them, one hand still pressed to her forehead. I saw something," she stammered, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "A memory, but it wasn't mine." Thomas paled visibly, his own memories of Ward 13 still hazy and uncertain. "What did you see?" he asked softly, putting an arm around Alina's shoulders. She took a deep breath, her eyes flicking between them before settling on Jonah. "You?" she said quietly. "I saw Jonah, but it wasn't him." Jonah frowned, trying to remember anything unusual about his own past encounters with Ward 13. But his mind was a fog bank, impenetrable and shifting, refusing to yield even the faintest glimpse of what lay beneath its surface. Alina continued, her voice barely above a whisper now. "You were here, years ago. You were part of something. Something terrible." Jonah shook his head sharply, rejecting her words even as they echoed the lingering doubts he harbored about himself. He wasn't responsible for whatever horrors had unfolded within these walls. He couldn't be. Thomas looked at Jonah, then back at Alina. "Could it have been someone else?" he suggested gently. "Maybe you picked up on something we missed." Alina shook her head firmly. "No," she insisted. "It was Jonah. I know it." As if summoned by their whispered conversation, the echoes grew louder still, resonating within each of them, like tolling bells rung deep inside their own skulls. And then, as suddenly as they'd begun, the voices fell silent once more. In that moment of silence, Jonah felt something change within him, a subtle shift in his perceptions, as though a door had opened somewhere far away, and he stood now on the precipice of some vast and unseen abyss. The pressure against his mind grew heavier still, insistent fingers pressing harder, pushing deeper, until they found their way inside. A memory surfaced unbidden, one that had long been buried beneath layers of guilt and shame. Jonah as a boy, standing in this very same hospital wing with Dr. Vance at his side. The psychiatrist's eyes gleamed with an intensity he'd almost forgotten, his voice barely more than a hiss as he leaned close to whisper, "Remember, Jonathan, remember what we've done together." Jonah stumbled back, colliding painfully with the wall behind him. He felt cold sweat break out across his forehead, his heart pounding wildly in his chest like some caged beast desperate for release. Thomas caught him by the elbows before he could fall completely to the ground, his own face pale and drawn. "What is it?" he asked urgently. "What did you see?" Jonah shook his head violently, trying desperately to dislodge that terrible memory before it could take root once more within his mind. But it was too late. Already the tendrils of doubt were reaching out again, seeking to ensnare him completely. Alina watched them both closely, her own expression inscrutable. Then she spoke softly into the oppressive silence. "We need to find out what happened here. What really happened." As one, they turned towards the heart of Ward 13, drawn inexorably onward by forces unseen and unknown. And as they walked, the echoes began again, swelling ever louder around them, until it seemed that all of creation was filled with the ceaseless whispers of forgotten sins. In the flickering glow of their flashlights, they stumbled upon it, a door labeled Ward 13, locked tight against intruders and time itself. Jonah's heart pounded in his chest like a trapped animal, echoing through the empty halls as if mocking him. He reached out tentatively, tracing the cold metal numbers etched into the worn paint. "Here," Alina said softly, passing him her flashlight so she could examine the doorframe closely. Her gloved fingers brushed against something embedded there. A small, tarnished key. She retrieved it gently, holding it up for them to see, before slotting it into the lock. The mechanism turned with an audible click, releasing decades of pent-up silence. The door swung open slowly, revealing a corridor swallowed by darkness. They stepped inside, their breaths misting in the chill air as they ventured deeper into Ward 13's forgotten heart. The first thing that struck them was the smell, damp and musty, laced with something acrid, like burnt electrical wiring. It clung to their nostrils, gagging them even through their scarves. The second was the silence. Absolute, oppressive, as if sound itself had been swallowed by this place. Their flashlights pierced the gloom, revealing walls stained with water damage and streaked with grime. Broken windows stared out into empty courtyards filled with overgrown ivy. Abandoned gurneys leaned against peeling walls like skeletal sentinels guarding some long-forgotten grave. Jonah's mind raced, trying to place this desolate scene within his memories of the once bustling hospital complex, where he'd visited his mother during her brief illness all those years ago. But there was no recognition here, only dread coiling around him like a snake. As they pressed onward, Thomas consulted his makeshift map based on blueprints they'd found in the main archives. "We're looking for a lab," he murmured, tracing their route with his finger. "According to these plans, it should be located near the center of Ward 13. Alina nodded, her eyes scanning every shadow warily. She clutched a notepad and pen tightly in one hand, jotting down observations about each room they passed. Empty medicine cabinets, rusted medical equipment, faded posters warning of infection control measures from another time. They came across a ward filled with beds, their mattresses stripped bare, springs protruding like ribs through tattered fabric. A sudden gust of wind howled through a shattered window, sending sheets fluttering like ghostly apparitions. Jonah's skin crawled as he imagined patients lying there once upon a time, now abandoned to rot in this desolate place. Further ahead, they discovered a room lined with cribs. Dried-up formula residue still clung to the feeding bottles propped up beside them. Alina picked one up gently, examining its contents under her flashlight beam, before setting it back down carefully. "These babies, they never got a chance," she whispered softly. Thomas looked away, his jaw clenched tightly against some unseen emotion. Jonah understood. This wasn't just about finding answers anymore. This was about giving voice to those who'd been silenced, justice for the voiceless souls trapped within these haunted walls. Finally, they found what they were looking for, a door marked Research Lab. Unlike the others, it remained closed but unlocked, as if whoever had last left this place intended to return one day. Jonah pushed it open cautiously, revealing rows upon rows of old laboratory equipment, gathering dust under the watchful gaze of flickering fluorescence lights. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place until they noticed a single desk tucked away in one corner, covered with stacks of yellowed papers and an ancient typewriter. Alina approached it carefully, blowing off layers of dust before she began leafing through the documents. "These are journal entries," she said after scanning several pages. "Written by Dr. Edgar Vance." Jonah felt a shiver run down his spine at the mention of that name. He remembered now. Dr. Vance had been their psychiatrist during those dark years when he and his father were subjected to endless tests, endless questions about what happened on that fateful night. "Listen to this," Alina continued, reading aloud from one entry. "Patient JM exhibited remarkable resistance today during our experimental session. His mind is a fortress. Breaking through takes great effort, but yields valuable insights into traumatic memory repression." Jonah recoiled as if struck by physical blow. He remembered those sessions, the hours spent locked away in some cold, sterile room, while Dr. Vance probed his mind with cruel fascination. "Subject's mental landscape is proving highly adaptable," Alina continued. "But we must push harder to shatter those barriers." Thomas looked out from where he'd been examining an old e-egg machine. "Barriers?" he echoed. What kind of experiments were they running here? They exchanged somber glances before turning their attention back to the journals. Each page seemed more damning than the last, describing in clinical detail how patients were forced into isolation tanks filled with ice water until they reached temporary hypothermia, then subjected to prolonged electric shocks while monitored via primitive EEG equipment. One passage caught Jonah's eye. "A still patient JM refuses full cooperation despite our best efforts. It seems I may have underestimated his resilience, a trait he no doubt inherited from that wretched father of his who continues to thwart us at every turn." He could hear the frustration in Vance's words, feel it resonating through these halls like some palpable force. As Alina turned another page, she gasped sharply. There, amidst detailed accounts of cruel experiments performed upon unwilling participants, was a single photograph tucked into the spine. 3 figures standing before Ward 13, Dr. Vance front and center, flanked by 2 younger versions of Jonah Mercer and his father, both looking miserable yet resigned. Jonah reached out tentatively, taking the photograph from Alina's trembling hands. He stared at it long and hard, feeling bile rise in his throat as memories came rushing back. His mother lying pale and lifeless on a hospital bed somewhere nearby. Him and his dad being led through these very halls by Vance, who promised them they could help her if they just cooperated. Except they never did find out how those experiments could save her, because there was no saving her. Not from cancer, not from whatever twisted fate had brought them all here together. "We need to keep moving," Thomas reminded them gently, breaking through Jonah's reverie. There might be more evidence hidden elsewhere in this lab. They searched systematically now, driven by grim determination rather than morbid curiosity. More journal entries were found detailing Vance's obsession with unlocking the mysteries of traumatic memory suppression and manipulation, how he believed it held the key to curing mental illnesses plaguing society. Then, they stumbled upon something even more disturbing. Rows upon rows of antique hypnosis equipment, many still bearing signs of recent usage. Alongside these were makeshift restraints designed specifically for keeping patients secure while under deep trance states. Alina picked up one such restraint, examining it closely before speaking softly into the heavy silence surrounding them. This wasn't just about studying trauma responses, he was controlling their minds. Jonah felt nausea rising within him. He remembered now too vividly how Vance would order him to remember things that never happened, forcing him to relive imagined horrors until they bled into his reality. Thomas found something else tucked away behind an old filing cabinet, a film reel labeled Ward 13 test footage. With careful precision, he threaded it onto an ancient projector before flicking on the machine. An image wavered onto the wall opposite them, grainy black and white footage of Ward 13 filled with patients. But these weren't like any patients they'd seen so far. These were drooling, glassy-eyed husks strapped into chairs or suspended from hoists like livestock awaiting slaughter. One figure moved through the crowd, pausing beside each subject briefly before moving on. Dr. Edgar Vance himself, dressed in white lab coat and holding a hypodermic needle filled with some unknown substance. As they watched horrified, Vance approached another patient strapped down tight, injecting whatever concoction he carried directly into their vein. Slowly, horribly, the captive began to convulse uncontrollably until finally it went limp, head lolling to one side, like a broken doll. Vance turned away from that lifeless form, approaching yet another victim who awaited his dark touch. Then suddenly, he paused mid-stride, looking directly into the camera lens with piercing gaze. It was almost as if he knew they were watching him now, all these years later. Jonah felt something cold slither down his spine at that chilling glance. He couldn't tear his eyes away from those terrible images playing out before them. The systematic breaking of human beings until naught remained but mindless husks awaiting disposal. Thomas reached out suddenly, switching off projector abruptly mid-scene. "We shouldn't watch anymore," he said hoarsely. "Not now, not here." They stood silent amidst that lab of horrors, each lost in their own thoughts, when suddenly Alina gasped sharply. "Look!" she cried, pointing towards one corner where a rusted old cot lay pushed against wall beneath layers of cobwebs. Jonah stepped closer tentatively, his flashlight beam cutting through shadows until it illuminated something lying there atop ragged mattress, a tiny skeleton, no larger than a child's dollhouse plaything. Beside it rested another photograph, this one depicting Vance holding aloft a newborn infant swaddled tightly in blanket. "Oh God," Alina choked out softly. "He killed babies too?" Jonah felt something snap inside him then, some final thread connecting him still to humanity severing cleanly away. He fell upon that cot like a man possessed, scooping up those fragile bones gently into cupped palms before cradling them protectively against his chest. "We're taking this with us," he growled fiercely through clenched teeth. This baby deserves better than being left here amongst these monsters' playgrounds. Thomas nodded solemnly. Agreed. But first, let's find out what else hides within Ward 13. Maybe even discover why all these horrors happened in the first place. Together, they ventured deeper still into that den of darkness and despair, each step echoing loudly against ancient stone floors, as if calling forth phantoms eager to whisper secrets long buried beneath time's cruel passage. The farther they went, however, the more they felt themselves not alone amidst those desolate halls, as though something unseen but very much alive stalked them ever closer, its icy breath whispering menacingly upon their necks. In the throes of waking, Jonah stumbled against the cold stone wall, his heart pounding like a captured animal against his ribs. He blinked away the remnants of sleep, or whatever had held him there, and squinted at his surroundings. The darkness seemed denser here, as if Ward 13 had sucked in all available light to feed its insatiable appetite for secrets. "Thomas," he called out softly, his voice barely a whisper against the oppressive silence. "Alina?" No response. He listened harder, straining his ears until they ached with tension. No soft snores from Thomas's makeshift bed nearby. No rustle of fabric signaling Alina's restless sleep. Only that heavy, expectant quiet, like an empty theater awaiting its performance. A trickle of dread wormed its way down Jonah's spine as he fumbled for his flashlight on the floor beside him. Its beam flickered to life reluctantly, casting eerie shadows that danced grotesquely across the walls. The memory of their last shared vision flashed through his mind. Thomas's terrified face, Alina's outstretched hand reaching for help they couldn't give each other. Was this another echo of some past terror, or something new altogether? He swept the light around him, taking in the familiar yet alien landscape of Ward 13. They'd set up camp near one of the many abandoned patient rooms, hoping proximity might yield insights into the force manipulating their memories. Now it felt more like they'd chosen to sleep amidst a graveyard, with every silent chamber bearing witness to untold horrors. A faint creaking echoed somewhere down the hallway, setting Jonah's teeth on edge. It was followed by a soft thud, then another, like footsteps attempting stealth but failing miserably. He gripped his flashlight tighter, knuckles white from exertion and fear. "Thomas? Alina?" he called again, louder this time. This time, there was an answer. Not words, but a low moan echoing down the corridor. It wasn't human, not quite. More like a twisted parody of one, designed to instill primal terror deep within his core. Jonah felt it resonate within him, stirring old wounds he thought had healed long ago. He stepped into the hallway, flashlight leading the way as he ventured deeper into Ward 13's rotting heart. The moan came again, louder now, accompanied by a cacophony of whispers that seemed to come from everywhere at once. They wormed their way into his ears, slithering down into his mind like snakes eager to burrow within his thoughts. "Shouldn't be here," they hissed, voices layered atop one another until it sounded as if hundreds spoke in unison. "Kiss isn't your place anymore. Me?" Jonah stumbled back against the wall, pressing himself flat against the cold stones. He clapped his hands over his ears, but the whispers persisted, seeping into him through pores and orifices alike. "Make them stop," he pleaded softly, feeling tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. Abruptly, silence fell like a guillotine blade. Jonah dared to hope it was finally over, only for something far worse to take its place. Memories, not his own this time. No, these were fragments torn from Thomas and Alina's minds, forced together into a grotesque puzzle he couldn't escape. He saw them through their eyes, tasted their fears on his tongue. Thomas as a child, huddled in the dark closet of his bedroom, sobbing silently while his drunken father raged downstairs. The terror etched onto little Thomas's face when that door creaked open, casting eerie shadows against his walls. Alina standing over her mother's grave, rain lashing down around her like fists trying to beat some semblance of emotion from her numb body. her fingers digging into the muddy earth as if hoping to anchor herself there forever, away from pain and loss. And then there was Vance, looming large in both their minds despite never having known him directly. His specter haunted their memories nonetheless. Thomas recalling stories told by his mother about that evil doctor. Alina remembering overheard conversations between her parents discussing the unfortunate incident at Ward 13. The Force fed on these fragments, twisting them into something new and terrible. Jonah watched as those remembered terrors began to merge, blending together until they formed a monstrous hybrid. Thomas's father morphing into Vance, then growing limbs like an arachnid creature, before Alina joined it, her grief fueling its power. Jonah stumbled backwards under the weight of their combined fears, his mind screaming for release even as he knew escape was impossible. Not from this. Not ever. He crashed onto the floor amidst scattered debris, remnants of Ward 13's past lives, now ground beneath his bones. As darkness claimed him once more, he heard a voice echoing down through those endless halls. You'll find them eventually, but by then, they won't be yours anymore. Monsieur? When Jonah awoke again, it was with the certainty that something fundamental had shifted within Ward 13. The air felt heavier, charged with an electric potential that made his skin crawl. Every step echoed louder than before, as if the very walls sought to betray him. The change in atmosphere wasn't confined solely to his perception either. Physical evidence lay strewn throughout their makeshift campsite. Furniture overturned, personal belongings scattered, signs of struggle etched into every surface. And blood. So much blood. It coated the floors like crimson paint, each droplet whispering tales of terror he couldn't bring himself to hear. But there was no sign of Thomas or Alina anywhere. No bodies torn apart by some unseen force, nor any indication they'd left willingly. Only emptiness and silence stretched out before him, mocking his desperation with their very absence. A faint noise caught Jonah's attention then. A soft rattling coming from behind one of the many doors lining this godforsaken hallway. He approached cautiously, flashlight held aloft like a makeshift weapon against whatever might lurk beyond that threshold. The door creaked open slowly under his gentle push, revealing a scene so grotesque it stole Jonah's breath away. Thomas and Alina hung suspended from the ceiling by lengths of torn bedsheet, their bodies swaying gently back and forth, as if caught in some macabre dance. Their eyes were closed, faces serene despite the fact they were quite clearly gone. In each of their laps rested an infant, tiny replicas of themselves, down to the slightest feature, yet somehow wrong, deeply flawed at a fundamental that made Jonah's insides roil with nausea. These children didn't move, didn't breathe. They simply existed, leached onto his friends' lifeless forms, like some sickening parody of nurturing. But there was more. Written in blood across the walls were messages meant for him alone. Us. Please make it stop. Jonah read them over and over again, feeling bile rise up in his throat until he couldn't hold it back any longer. He fell to his knees, retching violently onto the floor while those pitiful pleas echoed endlessly around him. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. They were meant to face this horror together, united against whatever sought to tear them apart, not find each other like this, broken, twisted beyond recognition. And for what? What possible purpose could justify such obscene desecration of their bodies? Rage boiled within Jonah now, hot and fierce enough to burn away fear entirely. He stood tall again, chest heaving with righteous fury as he surveyed the carnage before him. You won't have them, he growled into the darkness. Not like this. With renewed purpose driving his steps, Jonah moved through Ward 13 anew, no longer afraid of what lay ahead, but rather eager to confront it head-on. Each door he opened revealed more horrors etched into bone-deep memories. Alina's childhood home reduced to ashes, Thomas's body discovered amidst wreckage of some long-abandoned hospital wing. Yet even amidst such devastation, Jonah clung tight to hope. Because if they weren't here, then where? Then came a room unlike any other within Ward 13. Pristine and untouched by decay, despite the passage of time since last occupied. Here stood 2 cribs side by side, each containing an infant swaddled tightly in blankets that hid their faces entirely from view. Jonah approached slowly, heart pounding wildly against his ribs like a trapped animal desperate for escape. His hands trembled as he reached out towards those tiny bundles, and stopped short. No, not 2. Not yet. He couldn't bear to see their faces just now, not when everything hinged on such fragile threads of belief. So instead, he turned away and left them there untouched, hoping against hope they might remain forever unchanged by time or circumstance. Leaving behind that sanctuary proved harder still. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted down by doubts and dreads that seemed intent upon crushing him beneath their collective heel. But still Jonah pressed onward, determined to find answers no matter what price extracted from his soul. Finally, after what felt like years spent wandering labyrinthine halls of Ward 13, he stumbled into a vast chamber bathed in flickering torchlight. Here lay sprawled out before him the source of all their torment, an enormous pulsating mass of flesh and shadows that seemed alive despite lacking any discernible form. From within this monstrous entity echoed voices, countless iterations of Thomas, Alina, Vance, even Jonah himself mingling together until individual identities blurred into obscurity. They pleaded for release now, begged him to make things right once more, before darkness claimed them utterly. Jonah stood rooted there amidst that chorus of despair, unable to move or think or feel anything, save utter paralysis gripping his limbs like rigor mortis already setting in. Because here was where it ended. Not with triumph nor vengeance, but rather resignation, acceptance of truths too terrible ever to speak aloud. For buried deep beneath layers upon layers of lies and deceit lay truth's ugly heart beating steadily on. Ward 13 hadn't been destroyed by some unknown force seeking vengeance against Vance. No, instead they'd been swallowed whole by his creation. The baby bones found amidst wreckage weren't remnants left behind, but rather components integral to its design. Each tiny skeleton another life consumed wholly in service of this abomination's birth. And those infants resting peacefully in cribs? Those too were partaken entirely now, bodies dissolved entirely into monster's core, where they'd remain bound forevermore alongside all others lost within Ward 13's eternal halls. This was their fate, then. Become food for monstrosity birthed from Vance's darkest dreams. To save them meant destroying himself, consuming every last shred of sanity left intact amidst such madness, or walking away now, while still able, leaving behind shattered remnants of friends once loved. Jonah stood there alone amidst shadows cast by a twisted remnant of humanity, racked by choice neither option offered dared allow him make freely. Yet even as despair threatened to claim all hope, he reached out towards pulsating darkness before him, and found within grasp something small, warm, familiar. The photograph from Thomas's wallet, image of him and Elena laughing together on better days gone. Staring down into their smiling faces brought clarity back suddenly, sharp as knife blade cutting through fog blanketing mind. No matter what horrors lay ahead, no matter cost demanded by this final battle, he would not abandon them now. Not ever again. Though gripping tight that precious reminder between fingers, Jonah stepped forward towards looming terror, awaiting him there amidst darkness heart. It was time to reclaim Ward 13 once and for all, starting with vengeance drawn sharp against shadows themselves. In the gloom of Ward 13, time seemed to stretch and warp like taffy, pulling Jonah deeper into its oppressive grasp. The once faint hum of energy thrummed louder now, pulsating through the air like a heartbeat gone mad. He felt it resonate within his chest, syncopated with the pounding in his ears, each beat echoing a memory torn from him, a life force consumed by the unseen entity. Jonah moved cautiously down the corridor, his footsteps muffled by the thick dust coating the linoleum floor. The air grew heavier here, cloyingly sweet yet tinged with decay, reminiscent of an overripe fruit left too long in the sun. His skin crawled as he felt unseen eyes upon him, peeling back layers of reality to reveal the rotten core beneath. Thomas and Alina followed close behind, their breaths ragged echoes against the silence. They'd lost track of time amidst Ward 13's endless halls. Days had bled into nights until all notion of daybreak or twilight was lost. Hunger gnawed at them, but fear was their true tormentor, gnawing away at sanity like termites burrowing through timber. Each of them bore reminders of their encounters with a malevolent force. Thomas's left hand was twisted into a grotesque parody of itself, knuckles bulging, fingers curled inward like talons. Alina's hair had turned snow-white overnight, framing her face in an eerie halo against her sunken, shadowed eyes. Jonah alone seemed untouched physically, yet his mind felt frail as porcelain, teetering on the brink of shattering completely. They stumbled upon a room unlike any they'd seen before. No bars or restraints here. Instead, plush carpet covered the floor, and soft, inviting sofas lined the walls. A grand piano stood against one wall, its surface unmarred by dust. An ornate mirror hung above a mantelpiece adorned with family photographs. Smiling faces frozen in time, laughing children forever trapped within glass frames. "Welcome," echoed through the room, distorting their voices into something alien and unsettling. "You found me at last." A figure materialized from the shadows, standing beside the piano. Dr. Edgar Vance, his once impeccable suit now tattered. His tie loosened around a neck, pale as moonlight. His eyes were twin abysses, endless pits of darkness that seemed to swallow all light and hope. "We've been expecting you," he said, voice resonating with countless echoes of past patients crying out for help. "It took longer than I expected, but here you are, nonetheless." "What do you want?" Jonah growled, hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Why are we here?" Vance smiled, revealing teeth stained yellow by time and decay. "You're here because I need you," he said simply. "We all need each other, don't we? Isn't that why you came together in the first place? To help one another understand what happened here?" Thomas stepped forward, his distorted hand held out towards Vance like an offering. "Make it stop," he rasped. "Please, make this madness end." Vance glanced at Thomas's twisted limb, then back up to meet his gaze. "Oh, I intend to," he promised softly. "But first, we must confront the truth about Ward 13 and ourselves." He gestured towards the piano. "Shall we?" As one, they approached the instrument, drawn inexorably towards it despite themselves. Jonah hesitated briefly before sitting down on the bench, hands resting lightly upon the keys. They were cold beneath his touch, dead metal, unresponsive to his tentative playing. But then he remembered. Music was not their language anymore. Instead, they communicated through memory, sharing fragments of past experiences, hoping to find solace in unity amidst chaos. Jonah closed his eyes and reached out with his mind, groping blindly for Thomas's consciousness. He felt it there, flickering like a candle flame caught within a storm. Fear, desperation, and something else, a glimmer of hope born from shared ordeal. Together, they dipped into Alina's memories next, images flooding forth in vivid detail. Her childhood home filled with laughter, sunlight streaming through windows as she played piano for family gatherings. The first time, she saw Thomas and Jonah together at school, feeling drawn to their camaraderie despite herself. And then came the darkness. Ward 13 loomed large over every memory now, its shadow stretching across each scene like an inky stain spreading across watercolor paper. They moved through each other's minds swiftly, seeking answers buried deep within shared history. But with every fragment uncovered, another piece went missing, swallowed whole by Ward 13's voracious hunger. Suddenly, Jonah gasped aloud, eyes flying open as pain lanced through him like a physical wound. He stumbled away from the piano, falling to his knees amidst shattered remnants of memory. "I can't. I won't," he panted, clutching at his temples with both hands. "Not again. Not like this." Thomas knelt beside him, distorted hand gently touching Jonah's shoulder. "It's okay," he soothed softly. "We're here together. We'll face whatever happens next." But even as Thomas spoke those comforting words, something shifted within Ward 13. A subtle tremor running through its rotted bones, like the first tremors of an earthquake before the big one strikes. Vance watched them closely, head tilted slightly to one side, as if studying specimens under glass. "Ah," he breathed finally, satisfaction threading through his voice. "There it is. The final piece falls into place." He stepped towards Jonah, eyes locked onto theirs like a viper ready to strike. "You see now why you were drawn here, why we all needed each other so desperately. You've been given glimpses of the truth, but still refused to acknowledge it fully." Jonah shook his head vehemently, retreating from Vance's gazes as if burned by its touch. "No," he insisted hoarsely. "No more lies, no more games." Vance laughed then, a sound hollow and empty as an abandoned house echoing with distant echoes of joy long since faded away. "Very well," he conceded after several heartbeats had passed. "Let us lay our cards upon the table once and for all. Shall we?" He pointed at Jonah first, tracing patterns in the air reminiscent of constellations mapped out across sky. "You were always meant to return here," Vance declared solemnly. "Your father knew this well. Why else do you suppose he left behind that book containing tales hinting at Ward 13's dark secrets?" Next came Thomas, whom Vance regarded with pity mingled with envy. "And you've been carrying this burden longest of all, haven't you? All those years spent trying to protect others from what lay hidden deep inside yourself." Lastly, he turned his attention towards Alina, the woman who'd once held them both together against encroaching darkness, but now stood alone amidst ruins left behind by their shared past. "You," Vance whispered softly, reverently almost. "You are the key that unlocks everything, the linchpin holding all our fates intertwined." As one, they reached out towards Alina simultaneously, Jonah and Thomas each grasping one of her hands tightly within theirs. She gasped aloud at sudden contact, eyes flying wide open in shock and fear. But then something changed. Warmth flowed through their entwined fingers like sunlight, breaking through storm clouds. Memories flooded back into consciousness, no longer obscured by darkness but shining brightly forth like stars newly born amidst midnight sky. They saw now how intertwined their lives had always been, not merely friends bound together by shared history alone. No, there was something deeper binding them all together here within Ward 13's hallowed halls. Family bonds forged long ago, from blood spilled onto altar, dedicated to forgotten God, lurking beneath this very hospital. Bonds strengthened over generations until now. Final iteration? Stood poised on precipice of annihilation or salvation. As realization dawned upon each face, expressions morphed into twin masks mirroring one another perfectly. Horror mingling with awe as they stared deep into hearts laid bare before them at last. And so it was done. With collective breath held captive by Ward 13's insidious hold, Jonah Mercer, Thomas Hartley, and Alina Hartley merged together once more, not merely as friends or lovers, but something far more profound. Siblings torn apart by time, yet bound inexorably together through shared lineage. In that moment of unity born anew, amidst shattered remnants of memory, long lost to shadows cast by Ward 13's terrible past, a force awakened within them. Ancient power lying dormant for centuries now aroused from slumber eternal. It surged forth like floodwaters, breaking levee banks swollen beyond capacity, sweeping through corridors lined with echoing cries of tormented souls left behind in its wake. Everywhere it touched, decay crumbled away, leaving behind only pristine order, undisturbed by passage of time itself. Until at last, Ward 13 stood silent once more, no longer a rotting carcass festering with corruption, but rather transformed into gleaming temple dedicated to healing bodies and minds alike. Yet even as sun pierced darkness with renewed vigor, 3 figures remained huddled together amidst shadows lingering still within corners, cast by a newly risen light. For though monstrous weight borne collectively had been lifted from shoulders at long last, memories lost forever haunted eyes gazing forth upon world reborn anew. Awaiting reckoning yet to come for sins committed here long ago beneath watchful gaze of forgotten God, now stirring again amidst echoes of past suffering. But that was a story for another time. For now, they simply held each other close. 3 siblings reunited amidst dawn's golden embrace, ready together face whatever lay ahead down winding paths yet untrodden, by feet or hearts united once more, after long nights spent wandering alone, amidst shadows cast by Ward 13's terrible past. In the heart of Ward 13, the air grew heavy with anticipation as Jonah, Thomas, and Alina huddled together beneath the cold gaze of the old hospital's bare bulbs. Shadows stretched across their faces like spectral fingers, betraying the tension that gripped them all. They had sought out this confrontation willingly, fueled by anger and desperation. But now, on the precipice of revelation, uncertainty clawed at their hearts. The echoes of their footfalls resonated through the decaying corridors as they moved deeper into the abandoned wing, each step echoing like a drumbeat counting down to an inevitable reckoning. The once institutional scent had long since given way to something fouler, the stench of ancient rot and forgotten despair that seemed to cling to their clothes, infiltrate their lungs with every breath. A sudden chill swept through them, raising gooseflesh on skin taut with dread. It was as if the very walls had exhaled a collective sigh, carrying with it a whisper of remembered madness. Jonah shivered, his grip tightening around Alina's hand. She squeezed back, her fingers trembling in his grasp. Thomas paused before an unremarkable door, its wooden surface worn smooth by time and touch. "This is it," he murmured, more to himself than to them. He pushed the door open, revealing a room filled with ghosts of its past, metal-framed beds stripped bare, rusted IV stands, and yellowing charts scattered like leaves across the floor. At the far end stood an ancient desk, behind which sat a man they recognized from faded photographs tucked away in hidden journals. Dr. Edgar Vance. His eyes burned into them, unblinking and unwelcoming beneath thick brows like caterpillars frozen mid-crawl. Time had not been kind to him. His once proud bearing was now hunched, shoulders stooped as if bearing the weight of countless sins committed within these very walls. "Dr. Vance," Jonah whispered, a chill crawling up his spine at the sight of those accusing eyes. "You're real." Vance inclined his head slightly, acknowledging their presence with a cold smirk. Real enough, it seems. His voice was like dry leaves crunching underfoot, brittle and frail yet carrying an underlying strength that sent shivers down their spines. Alina stepped forward, defiance burning in her eyes despite the fear coiling within her gut. "What are you doing here? Why haven't you moved on?" Vance's smirk faded, replaced by a sneer of disdain. "Move on," he spat. "Why would I do that when there is still so much to enjoy here?" He gestured around them, his gaze lingering on the rotting walls and decaying furniture with something approaching affection. Thomas frowned, confusion knotting his brow. "You mean you're responsible for this? For everything we've seen? Everything that's happened?" Vance leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin as he regarded them like specimens under a microscope. "Responsible is such an ugly word," he said at last. "Let us say instead that I have cultivated these surroundings to better suit my needs." Jonah felt nausea rising within him, threatened to spill over into rage. "You mean you've been manipulating us? Playing with our minds?" Vance chuckled softly, the sound like dead leaves rustling against concrete. "Manipulating is such a harsh term," he said. "I prefer to think of it as guidance, nudging reality along its natural course." Alina shuddered visibly, wrapping her arms around herself as if warding off an unseen chill. "And what about us? What do you want from us?" Vance's eyes gleamed with malevolent curiosity as they flicked between them, lingering longest on Jonah. "Ah, my dear children," he murmured. "Always so eager to rush headlong into danger, aren't you?" He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the desk as his gaze bored into each of them in turn. "I have offered you choices before," he continued, voice dropping to a low growl. "Choices that would have allowed you to flee this place, leave Ward 13 behind, and live out your days untouched by its horrors." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "But you chose instead to dig deeper, to claw at the wound until you found me here." Thomas bristled at the accusation, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "We didn't come here for you," he snapped. "We came because this place, it hurt us. It took things from us that we can't get back." His voice cracked slightly on the last words, betraying the pain hidden beneath layers of anger and defiance. Vance regarded him coolly for a moment, before nodding once. "Yes," he agreed softly. "It did indeed." Then, like a viper striking, his demeanor changed utterly. Face contorting with sudden rage, he slammed his fists down onto the desk, shouting, "And yet you dare presume to judge me? To cast blame for sins not your own?" The room shook with the force of his outburst, dust raining down from the ceiling, as if disturbed by some unseen force. Jonah stumbled back, eyes wide with shock and fear, while Alina threw her arms up over her head protectively. Thomas alone stood firm against the storm's fury, gaze locked onto Vance's furious visage. "We're not here to judge you," he said calmly, voice cutting through Vance's tirade like a blade. "We just want answers." Vance froze amid a rant, surprise flashing across his features before giving way once more to that cold sneer. He regarded Thomas silently for several heartbeats, before slowly lowering himself back into his chair. "Answers," he echoed softly, rolling the word around on his tongue as though tasting it. "Very well then." Leaning forward again, he fixed each of them with an unblinking stare. "I will give you your answers. Yes, I will show you the truth behind Ward 13's terrible past, and in doing so, perhaps we shall both find redemption." Jonah felt bile rise in his throat at the thought of being bound to this creature through some shared burden of guilt or sin, but he pushed it down, forced himself to nod along with Thomas and Alina as they murmured tentative agreements. Vance smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his face into something almost human, albeit still horribly unsettling. "Excellent," he said, rising from his chair and gesturing for them to follow him deeper into Ward 13's rotting heart. "Come, my children. Let us walk together through darkness made flesh, and perhaps at last we shall find light awaiting us on the other side." Nitai. As they followed Vance down twisting corridors lined with forgotten horrors, Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that they were not merely being led towards answers, but also herded like lambs towards slaughter. Yet despite his misgivings, he could feel no alternative but to press onward, drawn inexorably along by forces unseen yet profoundly felt. It was as if Ward 13 itself had exhaled a collective sigh of relief at their decision. Shadows lengthening and walls closing in around them like welcoming arms embracing them ever closer towards the truth, hidden within its decaying heart. And though fear clawed at his chest with every step taken further into this realm forsaken by time and reason, Jonah knew that he could not, would not, turn back now. For they had come here seeking answers, and Ward 13 demanded payment in full before granting release from its terrible secrets, no matter the cost. In the labyrinthine depths of Ward 13, time seemed to have lost its meaning. Jonah, Thomas, and Alina followed Dr. Edgar Vance through corridors that twisted and turned like serpents, each step echoing ominously off the decaying walls, as if the very hospital was whispering warnings they could not comprehend. The air grew colder still, heavy with a scent that reminded Jonah of old coins and forgotten things buried deep underground. Vance led them to an imposing set of double doors, their handles entwined with rusted ivy like skeletal fingers clawing at escape. Beyond lay a vast chamber bathed in perpetual twilight despite the harsh glare of Vance's flashlight cutting through the gloom. The walls here were lined, not with hospital beds but cages, each one filled with what appeared to be grotesque mannequins cast from shadow and nightmare. "What is this place?" Alina asked softly, her voice barely audible amidst the sepulchral silence. Her eyes darted nervously between Vance's impassive form ahead of them and the horrifying tableau before them. "The theater," Vance replied without turning around, "where I once performed my greatest works." His voice echoed hauntingly off the cold stone floor, sending shivers down Jonah's spine despite himself. As they ventured deeper into the room, Jonah noticed that each cage bore an inscription etched into its metal frame. Fear, despair, anger, each emotion carved meticulously into the rusted iron as if it had been slowly eroded away by the very feelings themselves. He felt his heart pounding harder against his ribs, each beat resonating with primal dread. Vance paused before a cage at the chamber's center, its bars twisted and broken unlike any other. Within lay not a mannequin but something far worse, a figure suspended in midair, arms outstretched like some grotesque parody of Christ on the cross. It was unclear whether it was alive or dead, human or something else entirely. "That," Vance said, sweeping his arm towards the figure, "is what awaits those who dare challenge fate's decree." Thomas stepped closer to examine the creature more closely, but recoiled suddenly as if struck by an invisible force. His breath hit sharply in his throat, eyes widening with terror as he stumbled back into Jonah and Alina. It moved," Thomas gasped hoarsely, clutching at his chest where a strange symbol had begun glowing faintly beneath his shirt. "I felt something inside me." Jonah reached out to steady him, but found himself equally affected by the room's malevolent presence. His head throbbed with sudden intensity, memories long buried clawing their way back into his consciousness. Flashes of light, screams echoing off metal walls, Vance's face looming large and terrifyingly impassive. He shook his head violently, forcing the images away even as they threatened to overwhelm him. When he opened his eyes again, he found both Alina and Thomas staring at him with equal parts concern and fear. "Are you okay?" Alina asked gently, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Jonah nodded despite feeling anything but all right. His mouth tasted metallic, bile rising in his throat as another wave of nausea threatened to consume him whole. He could feel it now, the force that had been haunting their steps throughout Ward 13. Growing stronger with each stride deeper into its rotting heart. It was inside them all, feeding off their fears like some voracious parasite. Vance watched them silently from across the chamber, his expression inscrutable behind those round glasses, reflecting nothing but emptiness and darkness. "Yes," he said finally, breaking the oppressive silence that had fallen upon them once more. "It is time for you to confront your true selves, Jonah Mercer." Jonah blinked, caught off guard by Vance's use of his full name. He felt a chill run down his spine at the implication behind those words, a sense of foreboding settling heavy in his gut. "What do you mean?" he asked cautiously, already knowing deep down that he didn't want to hear the answer. Vance merely gestured towards the broken cage at the chamber's center. "Come," he urged softly, almost benevolently. "Let us begin." As Jonah approached the cage hesitantly, he noticed something carved into its base, a name inscribed alongside the other emotions, etched into the metal frame. His own name stared back up at him accusingly, each letter cut deep as if by some unseen hand wielding an unseen blade. Fear gripped him then, cold and unyielding like steel bands wrapped around his chest, squeezing the air from his lungs until black spots danced before his eyes. He felt a sudden urge to flee, to run far away from this place, from Vance, from himself. But it was too late. The force within Ward 13 had already taken hold of him completely, its tendrils snaking into his mind and dragging forth memories long suppressed. horrors he'd witnessed firsthand during his time at the hospital under Vance's care, atrocities committed in the name of science and madness. And now, standing here, amidst the remnants of those terrible experiments, Jonah realized with a gut-wrenching certainty that he had been complicit in them all along. His hands bore guilt as surely as Vance's own, stained forever red with blood, both real and imagined. He staggered back from the cage, retching violently onto the cold stone floor, until nothing remained but dry heaves echoing through emptiness within him. When at last he managed to raise his head again, he found Alina and Thomas regarding him with equal measures of pity and revulsion etched onto their faces. "You knew," Alina whispered hoarsely, tears streaming down her cheeks unheeded. "You were part of this, all along." Jonah could only nod dumbly in response, unable to find words adequate enough to express the shame and horror now coursing through him like poison. He felt like a stranger to himself, no longer the man who'd once sought redemption, but something far darker and more twisted instead. Meanwhile, Vance stood watching them silently from afar, his expression inscrutable as ever. But Jonah thought he detected a hint of satisfaction lurking behind those empty glass eyes. Satisfaction at having finally laid bare their darkest secrets. Satisfaction at witnessing the ruin of souls once thought innocent. As if sensing Jonah's gaze upon him, Vance turned suddenly towards them and smiled, not with kindness or benevolence, but rather like some malevolent entity reveling in its prey's torment. And then he spoke again, his voice resonating through Ward 13's decaying heart like thunder heralding the apocalypse itself. "Now," Vance intoned solemnly, "you understand why you could never escape me, Jonah Mercer. For we are bound together by fate, and I have been waiting so very long for your return." The force within them surged forth once more at those words, its power amplified tenfold, now that they knew the truth lurking beneath its shadowed depths. And though Jonah wanted nothing more than to flee from this place, to run far away from everything he'd ever known and done, he found himself unable to move, held fast by forces unseen yet overwhelmingly potent nonetheless. All around them, shadows began coalescing into tangible form, writhing tendrils of darkness nicking out towards them menacingly. And then, as one, Alina, Thomas, and Jonah Mercer screamed aloud into Ward 13's endless night. Their voices joined together in a chorus of despair that echoed ever onward through the halls of madness forevermore. As Jonah's scream echoed through Ward 13, something snapped within him. Instead of succumbing to despair, a fiery determination ignited in his chest. He wouldn't let Vance win. Not like this. Not ever. With an effort born from sheer willpower, Jonah wrenched his mind away from the force that sought to consume him. It felt like tearing through thick, tangled vines, each one laden with memories and emotions now foreign to him. But he persisted, fueled by the knowledge that Alina and Thomas were out there too, lost in their own struggles. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on Vance's smug smile mere inches away. Jonah reached up suddenly, grabbing Vance by his spectral lapels before the ghost could react. The cold was biting, invasive, but Jonah didn't let go. Instead, he poured all his concentration into that point of contact. "Let them go," Jonah growled through gritted teeth. "You wanted my attention? You've got it now." Vance's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with amusement as if sensing some trickery. But Jonah didn't falter. Instead, he focused his willpower into a single, piercing intent: release them. The force within him roared back, but this time Jonah held firm, anchoring himself against its onslaught. He felt it recoil slightly, thrown off by this unexpected resistance. Seizing the opportunity, Jonah reached deeper inside himself, delving into that dark well of power until he found what he sought, a thread connecting him to Alina and Thomas. With renewed determination, Jonah grasped those threads and pulled with all his might. It felt like wrestling an angry serpent, its body thrashing and coiling against him even as it tried to devour him whole. But Jonah refused to yield. Instead, he poured every ounce of his willpower into that tug of war. Slowly, ever so slowly, the pressure around Alina and Thomas began to ease. Their eyes fluttered open, uncertainty warring with relief in their gazes as they looked at Jonah, then at Vance, whose smug smile had faded, replaced by a growing unease. But Jonah wasn't done yet. With one final surge of effort, he yanked at the threads connecting them to Ward 13 itself. The very air around them seemed to shiver in response, the force within them faltering for just an instant. Vance snarled, his form flickering like a candle flame buffeted by wind. "You cannot defeat me here," he spat. "This is my domain." "Not anymore," Jonah replied softly, releasing Vance's lapels to grasp both Alina and Thomas's hands instead. Their fingers entwined, forming a bond stronger than any spectral force could break. With one last cry of defiance, Jonah pulled them away from Vance, away from Ward 13 itself. The walls around them shimmered, dissolving into nothingness as they retreated back through time, leaving the ghost and his hellish realm behind. They stumbled out onto the cold autumn grass of Jonah's childhood home, gasping for breath like drowning victims thrown overboard. Behind them, Ward 13 loomed tall and menacing, its windows now empty black holes rather than eyes watching their escape. Alina turned to Jonah, her face pale but determined. "We have to burn it," she said quietly. "All of it." Thomas nodded agreement, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything in those journals, everything Vance wrote about." Jonah looked at each of them in turn, before nodding solemnly. They entered the house together, moving like sleepwalkers through familiar rooms now haunted by more than just memories. In the study, they gathered every journal, every photograph, every book connected to Ward 13 or Dr. Edgar Vance. Back outside, Jonah struck a match against its box and tossed it onto the pile. The flames caught quickly, greedily consuming everything within their reach. They watched in silence as the fire grew taller, hotter, devouring years of pain and horror, along with those physical reminders. When nothing remained but ashes, they turned away from Ward 13 together, leaving behind not just its burning remnants, but also a part of themselves. The ghosts that had haunted them for so long finally lay to rest. As they drove away into the gathering dawn, Jonah caught sight of something in his rear-view mirror. A figure standing alone amidst the smoldering ruins. For an instant, he thought it might be Vance, returned one last time to taunt them with their shared fate. But then the figure turned slightly, allowing the growing light to fall upon its face. It wasn't Vance at all. Instead, Jonah found himself staring back into his own reflection, caught within those empty windows now filled once more with something resembling life. And as they left Ward 13 behind forevermore, Jonah knew, no matter what horrors lay ahead, they would face them together. For in the end, it wasn't the darkness that defined them, but their unyielding determination to fight against it.